Right, we're just going to give everyone a few moments to trickle in. Okay. I actually can't see. Did everybody did we successfully let folks into the webinar? Oh, I can see our participant count. There's now 51 participants. So, unless Beyond 12 brought a lot of additional panelists I didn't know about, it seems like people have successfully made it. Um, so I'm really delighted to be here today talking about using data to drive outcomes with AI at Beyond 12. With me, I have Dr. Eve Shapiro, the Chief Knowledge Officer of Beyond 12, who, as well as having the coolest title I think I've encountered, has really deep insights into the really innovative stuff that Beyond 12 is doing with data. And Alex Bernadotte, the CEO and founder of Beyond 12, who has really made it her mission to support students, particularly vulnerable students, in the journey to and through college. My goals for today are that folks will understand and the relationship between data and effective AI implementation. So going beyond, we can use ChatGPT to really what are we doing with the wealth of data that a lot of nonprofits have access to? Um, and then they will also have visibility into how organizations can use insights from their AI processes to guide ongoing program improvements. Um, so this case study with our fabulous Beyond 12 partners is part of a broader project that is focused on understanding equitable AI adoption within the nonprofit sector. So that whole project has got a series of webinars. Hopefully you are aware that you're in one of those webinars now, a podcast that's going to be launched on February 17th, and as well as a free equitable AI adoption framework that connects all of these pieces together, and a series of case studies, of which this is one. The other case studies in the series include Crisis Text Line, and focused on using technology to scale impact, quill.org about adapting to technology change, Chicago, change management with Chicago Public Schools. This case study on data to power AI with Beyond 12, and the final one, which has not been released yet, on stakeholder engagement with Talking Points in Aurora Public Schools. Um, you can use these QR codes to get the link to any of the case studies that have been yet released. The Beyond 12 case study that we are talking about today has not been released publicly yet, but webinar attendees will get early access to that through a link that will be shared in the chatlet and via QR code in a moment. Um, okay, and before we really start to dive into the content here, also a quick pitch for a virtual convening that we're hosting focused on this content on March 25th. Of our Equitable AI for Outcomes, moving from principles to practice, virtual convening is going to take place with a ton of really great experts in the field, including Dr. Eve Shapiro as well, who has just agreed to be one of our speakers. And we would love to have you guys join us there and learn more about what the exciting work that's happening across the nonprofit field with AI. Okay, so to dive in a little bit to our equitable AI adoption framework, we basically sat down with experts and nonprofit practitioners across the fields to think about what makes good AI adoption in the nonprofit space, which is obviously different from the kind of commercial uses of AI. And we came up with a number of different core elements. And the first element of our framework is around safe and fair practice. So, how are we doing AI in ways um, that are safe and fair, and what policies do we have in place to ensure that that's the case? Our second element is around designing for outcomes. So, less AI for the sake of AI, and more AI to drive the actual outcomes that nonprofits are trying to achieve. That's one of the focuses of this case study and webinar as well. Um, Another element of our framework is around stakeholder engagement. So, getting the people who are impacted by decisions, both internally and externally, to have input into the ways that AI tools are created and used. Um, Data, as probably I've said data approximately 20 times already, but data is a very, very key piece of effective use of AI. So that's another core element of our framework. Um, data governance and risk, obviously, as well as having quality data, you have to manage that data effectively and consider the risks of privacy and bias that are brought up by the use of data as well. Um, and then we like to say that AI is a human process, not just a tech process. The culture of learning and managing change is a really key piece of how nonprofits are doing AI effectively. As is, of course, well, the technology piece, as well as the humans, you have to have the technology implementation right. And then finally, once you've built your cool AI project, you have to monitor and assess it to make sure that it is doing what you expect it to do and performing well. So this case study is going to illuminate a couple of these areas in particular, including designing for outcomes, data governance and risk, and monitoring and assessing data. So those are sort of the elements of the framework that will be the main focus here. Here is your link to the case study, which again has not been publicly released yet, but is available to everybody on this webinar, and also in the chat if you are not a QR code person. All right, so what are our key takeaways here? The key pieces that we want to highlight throughout this conversation are the importance of identifying AI-shaped opportunities. So when is a problem a problem that AI can solve? Because not every problem is. Leveraging, once again, high quality data and information to fuel AI to enhance outcomes. Using AI model outputs for continuous program model research and development. And rigorously assessing and monitoring. And we're going to really dive into these themes with Alex and Eve today. Okay, so less talking from me, and more asking questions of the people that you guys are here to hear from. So let's start with Alex. Can you tell us a little bit about Beyond 12 and kind of situate us here?
Absolutely. Hi, Sarah. So excited to be having this conversation with you and Eve. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So yeah, to just start with, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Beyond 12. So we are a national tech-enabled nonprofit on a mission to close the economic divide in the U.S. by helping students from under-resourced communities earn college degrees and credentials that we like to say lead to meaningful careers and choice-filled lives. So since about 2010, we've supported over 230,000 college students across the country. And we focus on the stretch of the journey where we know students tend to fall through the cracks. It's once they enter college. And so we help students persist, graduate, and again, transition to meaningful careers. And our model brings together three elements. First, it's human coaches who work with students virtually while they're in college. The second is a campus customized, Socratic, and culturally inclusive Gen AI coach that not only answers students' questions, but sends them evidence-based reminders of the activities, deadlines, and behaviors that lead to success. And then the third element of our model is a back-end analytics engine that's powered by machine learning that allows us to predict which students need help and when, and then prescribe the right type of support. We've been around, as I mentioned, since 2010, and we know importantly that our coaching model works. So 66% of the students that we've coached for 2 years and 85% of the students that we've coached for 4 years have either graduated or persist through their 6th year. And that's nearly double the national average and persistence rates for similar students.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what got you guys first interested in AI? When did that happen, and what are the first things you were thinking when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I'm going to start even before the AI conversation to just talk about our vision, right? So even with the results that I outlined before, we have a bigger vision, right? So we're working toward a world where a student's zip code or their parents' level of education no longer predicts their college graduation or their life outcomes, right? So our interest in AI and in technology was never about AI for its own sake or technology for its own sake, right? Our interest has always been about our students and how we can scale what we know works for them. So the size of the problem is that every year about 1.4 million students from under-resourced communities or first-generation students enter college, and only about 30% of them will graduate or transition into a strong job or pursue advanced studies, right? So that gap for us is enormous. So from the beginning, we knew that if we wanted to meet the scale of that challenge by the millions, we had to build something that delivered the outcomes of a social service organization, but could scale like a technology company, right? So since our inception, we've been asking one core question of ourselves and of our model. How do you scale authentic, empathic human connection? And that's where technology and now Gen AI come in. So very early on, we realized that while human relationships are at the heart of our work, relationships can also be very finite, right? So data and technology gave us a way to identify patterns, to anticipate student needs, and support coaches in intervening early and more effectively. So from our perspective, to make a real dent in the college degree divide, we had to become both a coaching organization and a technology organization. AI is simply just one of the tools that helps us do that at scale, and particularly when AI is built carefully, governed responsibly, and always grounded in student well-being. So our AI journey began long before the Gen AI moment, and we'll talk to you a little bit about that, and Eve will go into the details of when we started and how we started with AI. But I think the most important point for us is that it's not just AI for AI's sake, and it's not technology for technology's sake. It really is, how do we scale what we know works for students so that we can deliver more of it, for as many students as possible?
I love that. And I love the idea that you're seeking to achieve the impact of a social service organization with the scale of a tech company, basically. How did you decide that AI would help you do that?
So it's a good question. And I just want to start by saying that AI wasn't a sudden pivot for us, right? So we've actually been using AI in the form of machine learning, and Eve will talk about that a little bit later, but we've been using AI for almost 8 years. So long before Gen AI became part of the public conversation, we were already using data to identify patterns, to predict when students might struggle, and to help our coaches intervene early and more effectively. So when OpenAI dropped ChatGPT on all of us in late 2022, it didn't feel like a shiny new opportunity. It felt like the technology had finally caught up to our vision, and a vision that we've been working towards for a long time, right? Again, how do you scale authentic, empathic human connection without diluting the impact? And so at that point, there were a few things that really mattered to us. We had a tech-enabled coaching model with demonstrated impact on long-term student outcomes. So that was something that was already there for us. And it was validated not just by our own internal data, but validated by third parties. And we had set this audacious goal of scaling to serve 1 million students annually by 2030, which would mean reaching about 6% of all undergraduate students and almost 18% of students from under-resourced communities. So we had this ambitious goal. We had already been using AI, and we had validated outcomes, right? Third-party validated outcomes. And the challenge is that when we pressure tested that goal, that million student goal against our existing model, we hit this very hard constraint, right? To reach 1 million students using our prior approach, we would have needed to hire more than 8,000 human coaches. And so as you can imagine, that's just not realistic financially or operationally. And more importantly, it wasn't the best use of our human expertise. And that's when Gen AI became truly compelling for us, right? And so we started the journey. We were selected, luckily, for the inaugural Google Gen AI Accelerator, and that gave us the space to be very thoughtful and disciplined about how we were going to develop and build our tool. And I think instead of starting with a generic large language model and asking like what it can do, we started with a different question. Where does human coaching add the most value, and where can technology responsibly carry more of the load, right? And so that led us to build and launch My Coach, our Gen AI powered coach. And what we're doing is we're augmenting a commercially available LLM with over a decade of our proprietary coach student interaction data, our evidence-based coaching curriculum, campus-specific context and very intentional tone of voice and cultural inclusion guidelines. And so that's how we began our Gen AI journey. I think the other thing that I want to say about this is that we do have a student-facing tool, and our Gen AI coach we think is pretty exciting, and we've piloted it with close to 1,000 students now, and we're seeing some really great results. But Gen AI also helps us scale our organization. So in addition to building student-facing tools, we built internal tools like a transcript parser, for instance, right? That eliminates hours of manual work for our coaches. So instead of collecting transcript data, for instance, our coaches can now focus on coaching. And so that's where their time and expertise matters the most. We're still on the journey to try to eliminate as much of that manual process as possible for our coaches. So that's just one example, but that's how we started the Gen AI journey in particular.
Fantastic. I was really fascinated, I think, by the depth of the data that you're using for impact there. Maybe Eve can tell us a little bit more about what kind of data you needed to have in hand to be able to take really good advantage of AI.
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. I think, Alex, you really hit it on the head when you said that the shift to AI was not a pivot, right? So this work fell right in line and really benefited from the fact that Beyond 12 has been both a data and service bridge from the beginning. This meant that we had a really strong foundation with many years of structured, well understood data at the student level, at the school level, and at the coaching level, and multiple years of robust data analysis and insights. And that really laid the foundation for this AI work. It's this combination of structured data at the student and coaching interaction level and an understanding of these data that allowed us to really take advantage of machine learning and grow that into a broader set of predictive and prescriptive analytics, both in the back end and now with generative AI on the front end. So, for example, that meant that we had already taken these data and derived measures that allowed us to really understand the performance of students, to understand student risk and need. And from there, that launched our predictive analytics work. So some of the earliest applications we undertook was really understanding what those early indicators of risk were for students. And what we found was that often the most meaningful interventions weren't necessarily the most intuitive. And that really required this deep understanding of the data before we even began with predictive analytics, right? So, for example, predictive analytics really unearthed that early coaching touch points were really important. That seems really logical, but somewhat counterintuitive. We found that consistency of those connections mattered more than the intensity. So it was more important to speak with students over time than it was to have many touch points within the first 2 months. And that was something that we wouldn't have been able to see without the complex algorithms in these predictive analytics, because the simple relationship was hidden in the more descriptive statistics, for example. But we also couldn't have done that without the derived measures that we had already put in place.
So the data and the AI are really, and the predictive analytics are really fueling one another. They can't really exist independently of each other.
That's exactly right.
So before I nerd out too hard about the data piece, I wanted to double click on something you said at the beginning that I thought was really interesting because you mentioned launching both the coaching and the sort of data and AI pieces together rather than doing one or the other. That's unusual. I think most nonprofits tend to add data infrastructure later. What made you guys prioritize data from the very beginning?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I said earlier, right? That like we started as a tech-enabled nonprofit because scale and sustainability mattered to us, but not only did it matter, but really the work that we were trying to do demanded it, right? So from the beginning, our vision was to integrate personalized coaching with a tech platform so that we could collect longitudinal data on students' journeys, so that we can connect them to resources, and so that we could provide a feedback loop to our partners, right? So high schools, high school-based organizations, and colleges. And we prioritize data because we believe that student support without data is frankly guesswork, right? If we're serious about closing the college degree divide, we need to be able to know what's working, for whom, and under what conditions. And we needed to be able to see patterns early, as Eve just outlined. We also needed to test our assumptions, and we needed to be able to adjust quickly. So for us, data serves a few very specific and important purposes, right? So first, I think data helps us see disparities clearly and act sooner. So when you're working with students from under-resourced communities, timing matters. Data allows us to identify risk early and intervene before those challenges compound and before those challenges lead students to drop out, right? So the second is data allows us to personalize support. Our students are not a monolith. We tend to treat students as a monolith when we use broad labels. First generation, right? Students from under-resourced communities, Black and Brown students, and no two students have the same academic, financial, or social context. So data helps our coaches meet students where they are rather than offering one-size-fits-all advice. And the third use of data for us is that it does create feedback loops for systems, not just individual students. So we share our insights with our partners so they can strengthen their student success practices, right? And that's how individual support becomes systems level improvement. And so building this data infrastructure early allowed us to hold ourselves accountable. So that's the first thing. It allowed us to improve continuously, and it allowed us to design technology, including AI, in a way that's grounded in real student experience, but also in a way that's co-created and co-designed with students. And it's one of the reasons we've been able to evolve thoughtfully as new tools have emerged.
That's, I think, a lot of really deep thought on the ways that data shapes elements of your program. I wanted to dive in a little bit more, particularly to the way that the data surfaces to your human coaches. So I know when we did the Eve, when we did the case study, Eve, you mentioned that when you first launched the your predictive models, you shared some of the risk scores and primary factors that were driving those risk scores with the coaches. Some coaches told you that they already knew that information, but when you dug deeper, you found that that knowledge was very uneven across the coaching caseload. That was a really critical learning moment. How did that feedback change what insights you surfaced and to who?
Yeah, it's so interesting. These tools are very powerful and they're often black boxes, especially when we get into the more complex prescriptive analytics. And one of the things we came to realize early is that they didn't, in and of themselves, provide some magic potion to solve problems or give meaningful insight. That instead, the analytics just weren't universally helpful, but we had to know how to use them. We had to understand the context of when those data would be useful and actionable, right? So one of the things for us really early on was that we made sure we were focusing on behavioral and experiential measures and outcomes and not demographic or structural ones, right? Because those are things that don't change. But instead, if we're looking for behavioral signals and understand the experiential components that are truly transformative for students, we can make change. So in this example, one of the first predictive models we built was to understand students' incoming need when they entered college. How much support would they need to persist through their first few years? And then, in an ongoing sense, what was um, happening with their post-secondary career that could surface to us risks for stop out or dropout? And one of the things that we really heard from coaches was that when they really deeply knew their students, those insights weren't particularly useful because they often lacked some of the nuance that human discernment can bring. right? And no algorithm, no matter how good it is, has that human discernment that really understands changes in tone in students' experience, the meaning of a family challenge, et cetera. But when coaches had not yet built those relationships, these insights were profoundly important. That understanding before students had built connection or spoken with the coach, that these predictive insights really helped coaches meet the student where they were and guide the conversation to unearth the student's own knowledge, to build that relationship, and to move toward productive, meaningful, effective coaching conversations. And so that insight that the value of these analytics really varied over time and really drove the human relationship and human coaching was really important to us.
So that's a really interesting insight that it's not that the predictive analytics is replacing the human judgment, but it's working in tandem as kind of a supplement.
That's right. That's exactly right. It enables us to do coaching better.
I love that. So speaking of doing coaching better, um, you guys hold your generative AI digital coach, my coach, to the same evaluation standards that you use for human coaches. Tell me a little bit about your thinking behind that approach.
I'm happy to take this one, Sarah. So, yeah, I mean, this was a very intentional choice for us. And it comes back to how we think about coaching and how we think about trust and care. For us, coaching isn't just a service, right? It's a deep human to human relationship. And whether support comes from a human coach or a digital coach, the student experience should meet the same bar. We felt like that was key to how we were building our Gen AI coach. And so, regardless of whether it's a human coach, a digital coach, a Gen AI coach, that experience as students feel it should be accurate, it should be asset based, it should be empowering, it should be inclusive, and it should be safe. And so we have spent decades for our human coaches of being able to design and outline very clear expectations around tone, around boundaries, around cultural responsiveness and inclusiveness, around evidence-based guidance, right? And so for our human coaches, again, over a decade, we review conversations, we look for patterns, we assess quality, right, of every coaching interaction. And most importantly, we provide ongoing feedback and training. We have a master coach who is leading our program, and we are constantly providing our human coaches with training. So we applied the same mindset to my coach. And we asked questions like, is the guidance aligned with what we know helps students persist and graduate? Is the tone supportive? Is it asset-based? Is it culturally inclusive? Does it encourage agency rather than dependency? Because that is the foundation of our coaching model. So we built our coaching model based on an executive coaching model called coactive coaching. And what we love about the principles of coactive coaching is the foundation that your coachees are creative, resourceful, and whole. They're not broken. They don't need to be fixed. And so we applied that same lens. And one of the most important questions for us as we were evaluating our my coach is, do students have an on-ramp to connect with a human coach when they need to? So for instance, we've created a feature called #human to allow students to signal to us when they want to schedule a call with a human coach. And sometimes we'll suggest it when it feels like the conversation requires something more nuanced and more complex, right, than our AI coach is able to provide. And that last point is where human in the loop really matters. So we are very clear that Gen AI is not appropriate for everything. Human review and intervention are essential anytime a situation is more complex, emotionally charged, or high stakes. And that includes moments involving mental health concerns, crises, sometimes conflicting institutional policies, or situations where context and judgment matter more than information. So human in the loop shows up even more extensively behind the scenes. And I'll let Eve talk to you in detail about that process. But for us, holding AI to human standards like forces discipline. It prevents the temptation to optimize for speed or scale at the expense of the student experience and at the expense of the human experience. It keeps us anchored in our values, right? Especially when the technology is moving so quickly. I think this is one of the things that we can agree on, right? That like once we have a set of guiding principles for AI in this particular instance, we are reading articles and launching tools that have advanced before we even have a very comprehensive understanding of what the previous tools are. So for us, ultimately, our goal isn't to build the most impressive AI tool. It's to build a support system students can trust. And treating Gen AI as part of our coaching ecosystem is how we do that responsibly.
That makes a lot of sense from kind of your focus on student outcomes, that you don't want this tool to just be cheaper. You want it to drive the same kind of outcomes for students. Okay, so you did promise that Eve would give me some more details there, so I'm going to take you up on that. Eve, can you tell us a little bit more about what that rigorous evaluation looks like when you're deploying AI in high stakes situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, Alex, that you really grounded us in our core principles around AI use. And for us, what we really realized is that that had to be the starting point. That before we got to technical decisions, we had to ground in these core principles and an understanding of how to make those principles actionable. And for us, that was a set of responsible and ethical use guidelines. And I think you all are going to share out the link to our framework and toolkit that we built for this that has really guided how we think about making sure that the coach is delivering quality support to students. And so we began with this responsible and ethical use framework. For us, that's empowerment, transparency, asset-based support, agency, among other core principles. And what that meant was that when we came to think about monitoring and evaluating the quality of the coach, we made a decision that we would build robust, layered monitoring and evaluation into my coach, not as a afterthought or as a side component, but as a core component of the coach. It's not simply quality checks, but really three fully customized AI systems of their own that wrap around and undergird the My Coach tool for students. So here's what those three layers are. And here come the details that you were asking for, Sarah. One model monitors and evaluates every message that My Coach creates. And it flags any missteps for human review using the same rubrics we use for human coaching. It's 15 rubrics, 46 quality and safety criteria. We use that to assess every message that My Coach creates and sends to students. That really ensures this parity between human and AI performance expectations. And because we're guided by that core principle of empowerment and agency for students, we built a way for students themselves to flag My Coach responses as less than optimal. So not only can they type hashtag human to connect with the coach, they can type hashtag red flag and tell us that they wish there had been a better answer. So not only are we monitoring, but we're empowering students to provide feedback about the quality of support. When that happens, those messages are immediately escalated in our system and involve human review to both support the student with human coaching, but also to really understand and assess the changes needed in the quality of response. A second model listens to every message that students send back to us, and it monitors for safety risks because we understand that there's a lot of promise with generative AI, but there's also opportunity for real harm and real safety to be missed, safety concerns to be missed. So we leverage a mature, externally validated moderation system that goes hand in hand with human-led mitigation processes so that student well-being comes first. For us, that means we make sure a human connects to a student if there's ever a safety concern before they can continue speaking with the tool, for example. So that's the second system. The third AI system, the third layer here, is that we have a fully developed evaluation framework that evaluates the quality of my coach responses in specific use cases, especially those that are complex, sensitive, or high stakes. And and we run through those test cases before any changes to my coach go live. So we have a continuously expanding framework. It has about 1,800 individual evaluation tests, 300 and so or so, 330 canon test cases, each of which is scored across at least 6 dimensions. And that is assessing response quality, safety, and alignment. And no change gets pushed to production unless it passes each one of these evaluation tests. And we're continuously running these canon test cases to ensure that the quality remains high, even as the tool iterates and evolves.
That really made my nerd heart happy, that level of detail about and the amount of thought you guys have put into those really rigorous evaluation standards. So with an eye on the clock, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get us towards a little bit of a wrap up here. Because I want to make sure that there's time for questions from the audience. So Alex, what advice would you give to other nonprofits that are getting started on this AI journey?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing I would say to my nonprofit peers, but also quite frankly, all organizations that are starting on this AI journey is this: stay married to the problem and not the solution. And that's just been a guiding principle that has helped me throughout my Beyond 12 journey. AI is a tool. It's a powerful one, but it is really just a tool. AI doesn't solve everything, and it's not the right answer for every challenge, even though we're getting bombarded with messages that say AI is the key, AI is the answer. So I would suggest before adopting AI, nonprofits should really be clear about the problem they're trying to solve, right? And ask honestly whether AI is the right tool for that problem. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no, and sometimes it's not yet. It may be in the future down the line, but we're not ready yet, right? And so I think when we've stayed committed to the problem instead of a particular solution, we've given ourselves permission to adapt our work. And as our communities evolve, we're able to evolve with them, right? And so we've had to learn that lesson ourselves at Beyond 12 several times. One of the very, I think, poignant examples that I can think of is our very first student-facing product was actually a Facebook app. So at the time, that's where students were. And we saw strong engagement at first, and then suddenly engagement dropped. We could have spent time trying to optimize the product or convincing ourselves that the platform was still right. But instead, because we had these feedback loops with our students and our students were at the table co-creating and co-designing with us, we talked to students. And what they told us was simple. They were moving away from Facebook. I'm not going to talk about the language that they used for who was on Facebook and who was not, but they were moving away from Facebook. Something about aunties. When aunties moved on Facebook, they needed to go, but they were becoming mobile first and in many cases mobile only. So we quickly pivoted, not because the technology failed, but because our solution no longer matched students' realities, right? And so, as I mentioned, that mindset has carried through to our work with AI. We're not attached to Gen AI because it's new or because it's exciting. We're interested in it because for certain challenges, that allows us to extend our support. It allows us to improve our timing, and it allows us to reach more students without losing the human core of our work. So we see it as a tool that allows us to advance our mission and to hopefully achieve this vision that we have of serving millions of students annually. And for us, what Gen AI has done for our vision, it's made something that seemed aspirational now be achievable. So that for me would be the advice, just to remain married to the problem and not to be so enamored with your solution that you're not willing to pivot when your users and when your community demands it.
So to ask the easy kind of follow-up question here, what do you see changing in a year? What do you see on the horizon for AI in the nonprofit sector, and how's that going to look different?
Happy to answer this, Eve. Sorry, I didn't realize that I was muted, and happy to get you to, to join in this response as well. Um, I think what we'll see over the next year, hopefully, will be less about novelty, right? And building these new AI tools and more about discernment. I think we're going to see fewer, AI tools for AI tools' sake. And I think more pressure to show real outcomes. I think practitioners are holding themselves accountable for this. I think funders are going to be holding practitioners accountable for this. But I think to start asking harder questions about effectiveness, about equity, about risk, about harm, around unintended consequences. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for our space. It's a good thing for the field. And I am hoping that this conversation about AI is going to fade into the background in the best way possible. So I think it's just going to become part of how nonprofits operate, for instance, right? Not something that's separate or special, but I think the organizations that do this well will be the ones that integrate AI into existing workflows, for instance, right? That keep humans in the loop and that use it to strengthen and not replace human relationships, right? And I think the nonprofits that are going to thrive are going to be the ones that remain deeply grounded in their mission, their willingness to experiment, and unafraid to pivot when the evidence or the community tells them to. So that is my hope and my wish. I think it's going to take us a while to get through the hype. And to get through all of the noise, but I'm hoping that we can get through the hype and the noise so that we can really start to think about this as another tool in our toolkit to allow us to achieve outsized impact rather than the thing itself or the impact itself.
I love
Wonderful.
that, Alex. And I think, I agree. And I think that, we're at a moment where there is a very real and well-founded pushback as well around AI. And I'm hoping that over the next year that we move away from this very binary, AI is going to solve all our problems at scale and at no cost, or AI is always terrible. And we get to the nuance in the middle, that we really begin to understand what an AI shaped problem is and how it can really elevate and accelerate the work that is uniquely human. It is not going to replace the things that we do, but it can really accentuate and bring more depth and value there when we choose the right problems to solve.
Fantastic. Well, I'd love to open the floor up for questions from the audience. You can put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. Oh, I see some questions are already coming in through the Q&A function. So I'll just grab those questions and ask them to our panelists here. And I also want to highlight the link to the case study with which our comms team is going to drop into the chat, so you guys can have early access to that. Um, Okay, so sorting through our Q&A here. Let's start with um how do you know when you have the foundational pieces in place to actually benefit from AI versus when you're just jumping on the trend? Oh, I love that question. Alex or Eve, whoever wants to take that. Alex, I
Eve, you're
see.
gonna
I will start us off, and then Alex, you can jump in. I think uh, we actually spoke to this a little bit earlier. I think the right questions are, is it the right kind of problem? Is it something that requires sifting through large amounts of data, finding patterns, repeating a standardized process, delivering well-defined information, right? Those are all things that suggest it might be an AI-shaped problem. But also, does it bring new capacity the ability to achieve something better than we could without AI, right? Instead of using AI just because, what does it unlock for us? And I think those are the places to begin um, discerning.
Yeah, and it's what I would add to that is that even before the age of AI, we identified like what are the outcomes that we want for students, right? For whom do we want those outcomes? And what are the data that we can collect that would allow us to understand whether we're achieving those outcomes or not? Those are like non-AI questions, right? That I think organizations should be asking themselves anyway. If you are delivering a product or a service, like, is it having an impact? And how do you know it's having an impact? And for whom is it having an impact? And so I think organizations can start there by saying, have we collected enough data, or are we in the process of collecting the data that allow us to measure whether our work is having an impact, right? And what are the data elements that we need to be collecting to answer those very basic questions? And that for me feels very core and foundational before an organization starts on their AI journey.
Well, I will follow up with another data-centered question that we got from the audience. Um, this is a tremendous amount and quality of data. Yes, it is. Where does it all live? How has your approach of storing and maintaining and securing that data changed over time?
That I'm definitely going to pass on over to Dr. Shapiro.
Thanks. It has absolutely changed over time and it continues to evolve. It continues to evolve, I think, for us as we really think about what responsible data stewardship looks like in as context changes and as data quality changes. For us, the in a very technical sense, we have a couple data warehouses and we are very intentional about where those data are stored at the student level, at the interaction level, and at the institutional or insights level. And we keep those data tightly controlled internally. So, for example, when we're using LLMs, we're never sending student level data or PII through a publicly available tool. Um, and then we are continuously monitoring those data both for quality, but also for those safety and protections, making sure that we are always the best stewards of student data. There's a lot more to get into there. I'm happy to follow up if folks have specific questions, but at the top level, uh, we're always following those best practices as they evolve and as the space evolves.
Building on that, we've got a great kind of follow-up question, which is that so many other products need to be built with such a safe and human-centered approach. Is Beyond 12 involved in any learning collaboratives to teach other folks how to develop that level of rigor, other than, I will say, participating in really cool case studies about what they're doing?
Sorry, I was muted. I am going to say that we are. And the first step towards that was working with lots of folks in the field to even create the responsible and ethical use of Gen AI toolkit and framework, because we felt compelled to share the lessons that we were learning. And I also want to say this, we are still on a journey, right? And I think oftentimes when you see case studies and when you listen to webinars like this, the implication can be that we have it all figured out. And I just want to say we don't. We don't have it. We have a lot of things figured out, and there is still a lot of questions with which we're grappling, again, particularly as the technology is moving so quickly. So we built the, responsible toolkit with some partners in the field, both academics, right? Higher ed institutions, K-12 institutions, we're offering that. It is a living document, so we're also asking for feedback on that. And we belong to lots of different, organizations, collaboratives that are trying to figure this out. I'm gonna, shout out Fast Forward. Fast Forward is an accelerator of tech nonprofits. We just had our alumni retreat last week, and that was a space where all of us who were in this on this journey to build AI tools, to build tech products, are participating in communities of practice and saying, hey, what are you learning? What were the challenges that you experienced? Even when we talk about the robust evaluation framework that we built on the back end, it was in collaboration. It was in collaboration with others in this space. And I can shout out Jared at Career Village, for instance, right, who sat down and said, okay, here's how we're thinking about it. This is how we're building it. Lots of help. Obviously, I mentioned that we were in the Google Gen AI Accelerator. So the other accelerator organizations, we were on a very early journey with Google to answer those questions. So we participate in as much as we can. We've built a toolkit, as a formal representation of capturing and sharing the lessons that we're learning. And also, it's important to note that we are on a journey. We don't have it all figured out.
That's great, and I think that's a great segue to a couple of I've got a couple of questions that I will call falling under the kind of the FOMO theme a little bit. So someone asks, Beyond 12 built predictive models for years before getting to generative AI. For organizations just starting out, should we be thinking about a sequence of AI capacities to build, or can we jump straight to those more advanced applications?
Yes, that's the answer, both. I think that it's helpful to build AI capabilities on top of robust data. But what's most important is not is or less important than following a prescribed sequence is really understanding your students, your context, your problem, and the data that you have in hand. Most importantly, there, both the data you have and what's missing. Is it really unevenly gathered? Are there signals that you know are core to the problem, but around which you don't collect the data? In some ways, having that data foundation is more important than following from descriptive statistics to predictive to prescriptive to generative AI. For sure, there will be work to be done to get all the data in the right place, to structure it, to do the insights gathering that allows you to ask the right questions and point the AI tools in the right direction. But I think it's the understanding that matters more than the sequencing.
I would also add to that, Eve. I think that's pretty powerful. Are there publicly available data sets, that you can also tap into? I think not every organization is going to be serving large enough sets of students, right, to be able to make meaning of the data that they're getting. And I'm saying students because that's our context, right? But like whoever your users are, whoever your communities are that you're serving. And so it's not always about building the data internally, but for your space, whatever that space is, are there publicly available data sets that you could potentially tap into, that you could then potentially add your data that allows you to do some of this predictive modeling or this signaling? It doesn't have to only be internally collected data, particularly for small organizations where the N precludes, your ability to make meaning, right? Or to be able to discern patterns. So it is both what's data available internally, but externally, do you have access to those large data sets that would allow you to do some of the same work so that your data is context, right? But it is not like the foundation of the model.
That makes a lot of sense. We've also got a follow-up question on that data theme. We have years of program data, but it's messy and in different systems that I think a lot of us can relate to. Do we need perfect data infrastructure before exploring AI, or is there a way to start building towards quality data while also thinking about future AI applications?
I'll take a first pass again, Alex, and then let you fill in. It does not need to be perfect. And again, with the understanding what's missing, what might be misleading, what assumptions are being made are really important. So, at Beyond 12, one of the things that means is that any insight work that we do is deeply grounded in both best practices in the space, but also academic research that lends structure and validation to the decisions we're making about those data and how to use them. And so these pathways can go hand in hand. There will be work, right? I mean, data science, any data scientist will say that 95% of the work is in the data staging and not in the actual analysis, right? Getting it into the right shape. And that I think is actually a challenge of AI because the motor of AI will run irrespective of the quality of the data or the decisions you're making. And only humans with knowledge, with context, with deep understanding of the problem can discern whether those outputs, those results, those insights are high quality and will help move towards solutions, right? The results are only as good as what you feed in to these models. And the more you can understand the problem and what data you have and don't have, the higher quality those outputs will be.
Um, Alex, unless you had anything to add, I think that's a perfect place to wrap this like very data focused and really fantastic panel. Thank you guys so much for sharing your expertise with us. I think everyone got a ton of value out of this. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So I hope that folks will come back for our final case study in the series, which will be around stakeholder engagement with talking points and Aurora Public Schools. Also doing some really, really cool, impactful work with AI at scale. Um, I just want to highlight a comment we got in the chat where someone said that this is the most valuable AI focused webinar they've attended in the past few months. So, Alex and Eve, you're amazing. Thank you. Yeah, and folks, come back for our next webinar, read our case study, come to our virtual convening and hear from more really cool folks like Alex and Eve.